Our next speaker is Robin Cagey. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She will be speaking on the effect of incarceration on the spouses and partners of inmates. This work, she can confirm whether or not she is actually a sociology or anthropology major, but I do know that her mentor, Robert Rubenstein, has his office next to mine, and so he is in the sociology department. So, Robin.
I'm an anthropology major. So.
Excellent.
Okay. All right. The purpose of this study was to understand what life is like for women with a spouse or partner in prison. I wanted to know whether the incarceration affects them emotionally, and to see how and why their everyday lives were changed. I wanted to hear the stories about the relationships with the incarcerated and the challenges they faced. And ultimately, through understanding these issues, I hope to understand how and why the relationships survived and how they could be helped. Though a considerable amount of research has been done examining how inmates are affected by prison conditions and culture, much less is focused on the spouses and partners of inmates. More than 1 in every 100 individuals in the United States is in prison, more than any other country in the world. Many of these individuals have become trapped in the prison system, increasing recidivism rates. Some research has shown that when inmates are given more support from family, chances of recidivism decrease. Children of inmates are often forced to live in single-parent homes and may become at-risk youth. They may be greatly affected by the remaining parents' lack of emotional and financial well-being. More research needs to be done, however, to understand how interactions with prison culture affect the emotional and financial well-being of the spouse or partner on the outside. Quick one. Thanks. Okay. From the contemporary literature I found on this subject, 3 themes emerged. Significant others of inmates are often affected financially. In her research, Arditi found that 2/3 of the women she interviewed were worse off financially and forced to live below the poverty line subsequent to the arrest. They used money to maintain contact with their significant other through phone calls, visits, and packages, while depriving themselves of resources. They also dealt with legal fees and child care. They were also emotionally affected, as Brahman found, the need to maintain a positive image could cause anxiety in public situations. Stigma may be felt when observing society's conceptualization of prisoners. Many also feel lonely, forced to be without their significant other, and may experience depression. Many, however, still love their spouse or partner and may even become closer during the incarceration since they must interact conversationally. Many different effects may occur in relationships with the significant other, family, and coworkers. Some hide the fact that their significant other is in prison for fear of being judged and viewed as illogical. She must also face society's stereotypes of single female-headed households. There is also the possibility that the man could develop a childlike dependence on the woman, and often expectations of the relationship change. Megan Comfort has proposed the theory that the spouses and wives of inmates undergo secondary prisonization. They become quasi-inmates living on the outside with freedom while obeying the regulations of the prison system. They become subjected to the deprivations of prison life, mimicking their spouses or partners' conditions. They also develop a new self-image which alters their normal behavior. The methods I used included interviews, analysis of transcripts, and content analysis. The interviews lasted about an hour long and asked questions pertaining to their experiences of the themes found in the literature review. I found the participants through an activist group and personal contacts. The interviews were transcribed and analyzed for themes, and I also analyzed an online support forum in which women discussed their feelings and problems, as well as a show on MTV called True Life, Raising Kids Alone, which followed the life of a woman with a fiancé in prison. All 3 participants had different stories. The first interview was with Vanessa, whose husband was already incarcerated when they were married. She moved to Maryland to be closer to him. Karen was interviewed second, and her husband was incarcerated after they had been married and had 2 children. The last interview was with Beth. She had never married her significant other, but she had 2 children with him, and because he was constantly in and out of prison, she ended the relationship, but has not cut off communication completely. Karen, Vanessa, and to some extent Beth, made remarks regarding employment and money. Karen worked multiple jobs to avoid resorting to welfare or relying on her family for money, and to afford the visits and phone calls with her husband. Vanessa moved to Maryland to save money on maintaining contact with her husband. Maintaining the relationship is clearly a great financial drain, and despite this, both Karen and Vanessa gave all they could. Beth, since she does not maintain as close contact, seems to experience less financial hardship. All three women discussed at length the psychological impacts the incarceration has had on them. Crying was mentioned and occurred during each interview. The emotions mentioned included anxiety, stress, loneliness, devastation, hopelessness, fear, frustration, and embarrassment. With such large emotional loads, all three needed some means of escape or release. Often work was a way of escape, as well as alcohol. For Karen, going to school was her way to escape. Prayer and activist work were ways for coping for Vanessa. Both Karen and Vanessa spoke from his perspective, expressing a deep interest in understanding and sympathizing in their husband's conditions, in some ways taking on his emotions as their own. For all of them, visiting seemed to instigate the most powerful emotions. They spoke of the fear of the prison, the desire to touch and be with him, and the happiness felt when visiting, and reserved that time for uplifting conversation. They also all discussed how being alone affected them emotionally, not having their significant other for support and comfort. The incarceration also had an impact on their relationships with others. Karen and Vanessa emphasized the inability to speak about their husband in public, fearing the judgments of others. They felt the need to keep a front of strength and happiness and to lie or hide the incarceration. Karen even said it was a good thing that many of her neighbors thought she and her husband were simply separated. The women's families were often put in the situation of both supporting her and sometimes disagreeing with her decision to stay in the relationship. Beth was advised by her aunt to end the relationship, and some of Vanessa's children did not want her to move to Maryland. Karen had the difficult situation of her husband's crime involving her family. All three needed to appear strong and independent to their families, but also rely on them for help, having the added comfort of them already knowing about her situation. When co-workers learned of the incarceration, it often changed how the women were perceived. Vanessa said the change in her boss's view of her was visible. Karen decided to simply tell her co-workers that she did not want to discuss her personal life at work. The absence of the children's father often causes strain on the mother, who tries to maintain the relationship between them. When she is the sole provider of her children, she is often absent due to work or school and must find people, often family, willing to watch the children, missing out on various events in their lives. The presence of children also, however, accounted for differences between Karen and Beth, a factor that caused them to either be more or less committed to the relationship. The level of commitment to the relationship can determine the extent the spouse or partner experiences financial difficulty and secondary prisonization. Beth did not experience either of these nearly as much as Karen or Vanessa because she was not committed to the relationship. She views the incarceration as his fault, saying he needs to get himself together throughout the interview. Both Vanessa and Karen felt more sympathy and a need to understand his prison experience. They did not see their husbands as bad guys and believed they could change. Karen even refers to her husband as having a sickness or mental illness. They have not, however, experienced the cycle of recidivism Beth has. Karen and Beth experienced transformations in their relationships with their significant others because he was incarcerated after their relationship began. The transformations Karen and Beth experienced were both similar and different. In both, communication between the couples improved while he was in prison. What caused the differences, however, were the presence of young children. Karen stood by him because he was the father of her children. Beth ended the relationship because the incarceration hurt her children. Time became an issue for Karen and Jocelyn from MTV's True Life, since they tried very hard to ensure their children had the best life possible while remaining committed to a relationship and donating resources to it. They both had tiring jobs and went to school and still made time to care for their children and maintain contact with their significant other. Vanessa's discussion of her relationship at times held a sense of superiority over other relationships. She notes how they probably talk more and get along better than most couples despite the incarceration. She also says a few times, "There's no other man for me." This idea is absent from the stories of the other women. In American culture, marriage is viewed as an institution that requires equal commitment and sacrifices, and when one member of the relationship is absent, this cultural norm is challenged. In this situation, the spouse or partner on the outside seemingly must voluntarily make more sacrifices and show more commitment than the incarcerated partner. Those who remain in the relationship perhaps recognize the deprivations and sacrifices involved in prison life and feel sympathy for him, seeing it as not his fault, but the system's fault that he is less able to demonstrate commitment. Gender roles in the relationships were both challenged and reinforced. The female role is reinforced when she tends to him in prison, cooking him meals as Karen did, and sending him things. She is also solely tending to the children, traditionally the female's job. It is challenged, however, when she becomes the breadwinner of the family and becomes independent, choosing if and when he sees the children. The woman becomes the head of the household, and as Karen said, has to be strong for everyone. His role is much more challenged than reinforced, however. He may start to show his emotional side more often and become more conversational. He shows dependency on the woman for his emotional and financial well-being and the maintenance of their relationship. Karen and Vanessa demonstrated characteristics of secondary prisonization, allowing regulations of their own freedom that is prison-enforced or self-imposed. They modify their behavior, mimicking his conditions and regulations, Vanessa living a stark existence, and Karen limiting personal pleasures such as alcohol. They must also obey regulations enforced by the prison, such as the inability to touch the other person when visiting, being searched before entry, and sending letters and packages in which certain items are forbidden. It seems support groups and other ways of supporting the spouses and partners of inmates need to be improved, considering the lack of time and money they are able to devote to them. This raises the question of whether the prison system should be responsible for this, since there are benefits for inmates, such as better resocialization and decreased recidivism when loved ones maintain contact with them. Women also often have problems providing daycare for their children when working, going to school, and visiting their significant other, and all would benefit from a system to make this easier. The public perception of inmates and those who stand by him need to be changed with an understanding that the bad guy image in shows such as Lockup is the minority in prison population. Then perhaps the significant others of inmates would feel less social stigma and experience less anxiety and depression. The occurrence of poverty among these families is rather high and should be a concern for general society. As in all studies, there were of course limitations with the chosen methods. Due to the nature of the qualitative study, a smaller sample was used for face-to-face interviews. The sample was also a convenient sample, making results slightly less generalizable since it's unknown exactly how representative the participants were of the whole population. This problem is mitigated, however, when combined with the data of other more recent studies. Other areas that need to be explored arose during this study. More research needs to be performed that focuses on the effect of a woman's imprisonment on her male spouse or partner. The effect of incarceration on the same-sex couple is also not understood. It is also, however, it is also unclear how the women's emotions affect her children, which could provide more motivation to help this population. The recent development of online support groups and forums should also be evaluated, as they could perhaps be an answer for improving support systems for the spouses and partners of inmates. I would like to thank Dr. Robert Rubenstein, Mr. Roland Knapp, and Dr. Elizabeth Streeton, and Walter Lomax, and the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative for their help in completing this project. Any questions? Yeah.
It's fantastic. Are you going to continue to try and interview additional women?
Yeah, I definitely expect to after I graduate in May, but I still would like to go further with this project.
Great. What did you find to be the most surprising?
I guess I didn't really consider how the gender roles would be changed as much. That was kind of a thing I had not read or had not thought about before the interviews. So yeah, that was surprising.